Welcome listeners to listen to the short story, The Steadfastness of Dmitri's Heart, an examination of faith, family, and the enduring echoes of a distant war. In the vast, undulating expanse of Mother Russia, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the turning of the seasons and the unyielding embrace of the earth, there lay countless villages, each a quiet microcosm of existence, its people bound by tradition, toil, and an unwavering faith. Among these, the humble settlement of Krasnoe nestled, seemingly untouched by the grand, tumultuous currents of empire and war that often swept across the distant horizons. It is within the quiet confines of this village, in the very heart of a man named Dmitri Ivanovich Volkov, a simple peasant deeply rooted in the soil, devoted to his family, and firm in his inherited beliefs, that we shall embark upon a chronicle of enduring steadfastness. A testament to the human spirit's capacity for profound resilience when confronted by the inexplicable cruelty of man's folly and the relentless, echoing demands of a distant conflict. Chapter 1. The Rhythm of the Village and the Innocent Heart. The dawn, a hesitant, pearly gray, began its slow ascent over the eastern horizon, painting the vast, slumbering expanse of the Russian steppe with the first brushstrokes of a new day. In the village of Krasnoe, nestled like a forgotten jewel in a gentle hollow, the world was still cloaked in a profound, almost sacred silence, broken only by the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the ancient birch trees that bordered the village. This was a silence that spoke not of emptiness, but of a deep, abiding peace, a timeless stillness that had cradled generations of lives within its embrace. Here, in this secluded corner of Mother Russia, far from the clamor of cities and the machinations of distant empires, time did not merely pass, it unfolded, deliberate and unhurried, like the slow, steady turning of a great, unseen wheel. Life was intrinsically bound to the land, to the inexorable march of the seasons, to the ancient, sacred rhythms of sowing and reaping, of birth and death, all punctuated by the solemn, reassuring tolling of the village church bell, a sound that resonated not just through the air, but through the very souls of its inhabitants. Dmitri Ivanovich Volkov, a man poised on the cusp of his 30th year, was already stirring. He lay for a long moment, suspended between the lingering embrace of sleep and the burgeoning demands of the day. His senses acutely attuned to the subtle symphony of his home. Beside him, the soft, even breathing of his beloved wife, Anna, rose and fell with a comforting regularity, a gentle counterpoint to his own awakened consciousness. Across the modest izba, on their smaller, humbler pallets, the lighter, quicker sighs of their two children, Fyodor and Maria, blended into the quiet domestic hum, each breath a testament to the fragile, precious miracle of their shared existence. The air within their home, still holding the cool dampness of the receding night, carried a subtle, comforting tapestry of scents, the faint, wholesome aroma of last night's rye bread, the sweet, earthy fragrance of the thatched roof, and the almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke clinging to the rough-hewn logs of the walls. It was a bouquet as familiar to Dmitri as the beat of his own heart. A rich, elemental perfume that spoke of permanence, of belonging, of the deep, unshakable roots he had sunk into this very soil. Every morning, this profound awareness settled upon him, a deep, almost overwhelming gratitude that felt like a prayer in itself, a silent, humble acknowledgement of the boundless gifts bestowed upon him by a benevolent providence. He considered the warmth of Anna's presence, the quiet miracle of their shared life, the tangible joy of the children's slumber, and his heart, though simple, swelled with an emotion so profound it bordered on the ineffable. He rose with the silent, practiced efficiency of a man whose life was dictated by the sun and the demands of the earth. His movements economical and imbued with a quiet purpose. His large, calloused hands, browned and hardened by countless hours of sun and toil, reached for his simple tunic and trousers, made of coarse, unbleached homespun linen, garments that were as much a part of him as his own skin. Dmitri was, in every fiber of his being, a man of the land, shaped and molded by its unyielding demands. His frame was solid and unyielding, his broad shoulders capable of bearing burdens that would crush lesser men. His face, though etched with the nascent lines of honest labor, still possessed a youthful earnestness about his clear, intelligent gray eyes. These eyes, often serious and contemplative, held a deep, unshakable calm, a profound serenity that was a direct reflection of the profound simplicity and unwavering certainty of his faith. He moved deliberately, never with haste, a characteristic he had inherited not merely from his stern but loving father, but from generations of peasants who understood, with an intuitive certainty, that the earth demanded patience, not speed, that true abundance sprang from diligent, unhurried effort. He knelt briefly before the icon in the corner of the izba. A faded, venerable image of the Mother of God holding the Christ child. Its silver riza tarnished with the patina of centuries but radiating a quiet, immutable sanctity in the dim, nascent light. His lips moved in a silent prayer of gratitude. A humble offering for the dawning of another day. For the continued health and well-being of his beloved family. For the enduring blessing of the fertile earth that sustained them all. He bowed his head, his large, capable hands clasped together, feeling the familiar, comforting weight of tradition, of a tangible connection to something ancient and eternal. Something that transcended the fleeting passage of individual lives. For Dmitri, faith was not a convoluted doctrine debated in grand, distant halls of learning, nor a set of abstract theological propositions. It was the very air he breathed. The invisible yet omnipresent foundation upon which his entire existence was meticulously built. It was a tangible presence, a guiding hand discernible in every sunrise, every gentle rainfall, every tender sprout pushing its way through the rich, black earth. He believed not with the cold, calculating intellect, but with the whole, undivided essence of his being, a belief passed down through 1,000 generations of Russian peasants who had faced the immense, terrifying vastness of the steppe, the merciless harshness of winter, and the uncertain, often capricious bounty of the harvest with only their arduous labor and their profound, unyielding trust in God. His faith was woven into the very fabric of Krasnoe, discernible in the unhurried lives of its inhabitants, in the ancient, gnarled oak tree that stood like a silent, watchful sentinel over the village, and in the ceaseless, life-giving flow of the small, meandering river that skirted its western edge. Outside, the air was crisp and invigorating, carrying the faint, yet distinct, scent of wood smoke already rising in thin, vertical columns from other chimneys, a testament to the early industry of his neighbors. The first rooster's crow, a ragged yet insistent clarion call, pierced the morning stillness, soon joined by others in a distant, ragged chorus that heralded the full arrival of day. Dmitri walked past the small, meticulously tended kitchen garden, its rows of sturdy cabbage and potato plants still dewy with the night's mist. Towards the modest stable where their 2 horses, a gentle mare named Zorka, known for her placid disposition and tireless spirit, and a sturdy, reliable gelding called Belyi, stirred restlessly in their stalls. Sensing the impending start of the day's work, he greeted them with a soft murmur, a familiar, comforting sound, stroking their warm, velvety manes, feeling the immense power and gentle spirit of these creatures who were so integral to their lives. Before beginning the morning chores, the rhythmic scraping of the muck rake, the measured distribution of fragrant hay, and the meticulous preparation of their harnesses for the day's arduous work in the fields. The mingled scents of hay, warm horseflesh, and the subtle tang of manure filled the air, a familiar comfort, a profound promise of honest labor and productive effort. His father, Ivan Petrovich, emerged from his own adjacent izba as Dmitri led Zorka out into the pale light of the yard. Ivan Petrovich was a man of immense, almost formidable presence, even in his declining years. His back, though slightly stooped by the cumulative weight of decades of relentless labor, retained the formidable breadth and power of a lifelong laborer, and his face, deeply lined and weathered like the bark of an ancient oak, bore the indelible marks of countless suns and blizzards, a living map of a life lived in direct communion with the elements. His eyes, keen and discerning, held a profound wisdom born of hard-won experience and an unyielding adherence to tradition. A gaze that seemed to penetrate to the very essence of things. He had been a soldier in his youth, serving the Tsar in a forgotten campaign in the distant south, and though he rarely spoke of it, the quiet discipline, the almost stoic gravity that permeated his entire being, were surely remnants of that distant, formative life. He moved with a deliberate slowness now. A proud patriarch observing his domain. His gaze missing nothing, his assessment of the day's manifold tasks already complete in his mind. A silent, internal calculation. "Good morning, father," Dmitri said, his voice soft, imbued with a natural, unforced deference to the elder. A respect deeply ingrained since childhood. "Good morning, Dima," Ivan Petrovich replied, his voice a low, resonant rumble, like distant thunder echoing across the steppe. He surveyed the sky, then bent to touch the dew-laden grass. A lifetime of observing nature's subtle, often elusive signs etched into his very being. "Looks to be a good day for the hay. The sun will draw the moisture swiftly." His voice carried the immense weight of authority, the accumulated wisdom of generations. A voice that had guided Dmitri since his earliest memories. A voice that had shaped his understanding of the world. Dmitri nodded, already anticipating the work, the satisfying ache of muscles engaged in purposeful labor, the rhythmic swing of the scythe, the scent of cut grass. The hay was crucial, the very lifeblood of their livestock through the long, unforgiving winter months, a constant, arduous battle against hunger and the merciless Russian cold. Their land, though modest, a few dozen desiatins inherited through generations of Volkovs, was meticulously managed, a testament to the family's diligent stewardship, their unwavering commitment to the earth. They were not wealthy, certainly not by the opulent standards of the gentry, whose sprawling estates lay many miles away, beyond the reach of their humble lives. But they were self-sufficient, their lives inextricably entwined with the rich, black earth they tilled, their prosperity tied directly to their industriousness and, above all, to God's boundless grace. Their existence was a delicate, precarious balance, one that demanded constant vigilance, unending effort, and an unshakable faith in the divine order. Soon, Anna emerged from their izba, her movements as quiet and graceful as a forest stream, her presence a gentle, calming force. Anna, with her thick, plaited auburn hair, always neatly bound and gleaming in the nascent light, and eyes the color of hazelnut that sparkled with a quiet intelligence and deep compassion, was Dmitri's anchor, his quiet strength, his unwavering support. She was a woman of gentle spirit but formidable resolve, her hands skilled in all the countless, arduous tasks that comprised a peasant woman's life, the rhythmic kneading of dough for bread, the intricate art of weaving, the meticulous tending of the kitchen garden, the careful preservation of the harvest for the lean winter months, the patient, loving raising of their children, the endless spinning of thread, the tireless mending of clothes. She carried a wooden pail for water, her face still soft with the lingering traces of sleep but already radiating a quiet energy, a profound readiness to embrace the day's manifold demands. "The children are stirring," she murmured to Dmitri as she passed him, her voice a soft, melodic whisper that brought him immense comfort, a sound as familiar and cherished as the rustle of leaves in the wind. "I'll fetch water from the well and start the kasha." Dmitri watched her go, a profound sense of contentment warming him from within, settling in his chest like the gentle warmth of the morning sun. Anna was not merely his wife, she was the very heart of their home, the vigilant keeper of its warmth and light, the quiet, tireless orchestrator of its daily rhythms, the silent guardian of its peace. Their marriage had been arranged many years ago, as was the time-honored custom in Krasnoe and countless other villages across the vast expanse of Russia. But love had blossomed organically within its traditional bounds. A quiet, steady flame that burned brighter with each passing year, deepened and enriched by shared labor, shared dreams, and shared simple, unadorned joys. He trusted her implicitly, knew her unspoken thoughts and concerns from the subtle shifts in her gaze, and found immense, unwavering comfort in her steadfast presence, her unwavering loyalty, her profound understanding of his very soul. The village of Krasnoe itself was a living tapestry woven from similar lives, a testament to the enduring communal spirit and resilience of the Russian peasantry. It was a cluster of perhaps 50 izbas, mostly constructed of rough-hewn logs, with steep, gracefully sloped thatched roofs that seemed to blend seamlessly into the surrounding landscape, and small, intricately carved window frames that peeked out like watchful eyes, observing the slow unfolding of life. At its very center stood the modest wooden church of St. Nicholas, its single onion-domed cupola, painted a weathered, faded green, a humble yet powerful beacon of faith visible from across the vast, undulating fields, its cross glinting faintly in the morning sun, a symbol of hope and divine protection. Around it, the village green, a patch of worn earth, where children played with simple wooden toys and women gathered to gossip as they washed clothes in the communal trough. Their voices a low, continuous murmur, a constant, reassuring hum of life. Beyond the village, the vast, undulating fields stretched out to the distant horizon, a patchwork quilt of nascent green shoots, dark, fertile fallow earth awaiting the plow, and the occasional shimmering expanse of wildflowers, daisies, cornflowers, poppies, swaying gently in the breeze, a riot of color against the verdant backdrop. Further still, the dark, enigmatic line of the distant forest, a vital source of timber and game, but also a mysterious, sometimes fearsome, boundary, rumored to hold ancient spirits and forgotten secrets, a place of both sustenance and silent, watchful mystery. Dmitri and his father spent the morning meticulously tending to the hay. The sun, as Ivan Petrovich had predicted with his innate wisdom, rose higher in the sky, its golden rays drying the dew and warming their backs with its growing intensity. The work was arduous, a steady, rhythmic cadence of scythes swishing through the tall, fragrant grass, laying it in neat, precise rows, each sweep of the blade a practiced, deliberate motion, honed by years of repetition. It was work that demanded immense strength and unyielding endurance, a deep, almost symbiotic connection between man and tool, but also a contemplative quietude. In the vastness of the field, under the immense, boundless sky, Dmitri felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to something larger than himself, to the very land that sustained them, to his countless ancestors who had worked this very soil for centuries, their spirits seemingly present in the very earth, and to the divine order that governed it all with an unseen hand. His thoughts, though not articulated in words, were a continuous, unspoken dialogue with the land and with God, a silent communion that nourished his soul. He often thought of the seasons, not as abstract concepts listed in a calendar or merely as markers of time, but as living entities, distinct personalities, each with its own unique character and demands. Spring, with its nascent hope and the quiet miracle of germination, the earth awakening from its long slumber, vibrant with new life. Summer, with its fierce, relentless heat and the arduous labor of growth, demanding constant vigilance and tireless effort. Autumn, with its rich, golden bounty and the bittersweet farewell to warmth, a time of harvest and meticulous preparation for the lean months ahead. And winter, a time of stark, breathtaking beauty, of profound stillness, of the earth sleeping beneath a vast, pristine blanket of snow, and of patient, unwavering waiting for the inevitable return of life. Each season had its own profound lessons, its unique blessings, and its inevitable trials. His faith was inextricably woven into this grand, cyclical dance, a deep-seated belief that God provided, that suffering was often a test of one's spirit, a crucible for the soul, and that perseverance, born of faith and diligence, would ultimately yield its own profound reward, a quiet, unshakable trust in the unfolding of divine will. As the morning wore on, the distant, rhythmic sound of other scythes joined theirs, a symphony of communal labor rising from across the vast, undulating fields, each metallic swish a testament to effort, to shared purpose. The air filled with the sweet, fresh scent of cut grass, mingling harmoniously with the rich, earthy aroma of the soil, a primal perfume that spoke of life and sustenance. Occasionally, a neighbor would pass by, leading a cart laden with tools or walking to another part of their land, offering a wave or a brief, customary greeting. God's blessing on your work, Dmitri Ivanovich, and on yours, Ivan Nikolaevich. These were not mere pleasantries or empty formalities but sincere invocations, heartfelt acknowledgments of shared struggle, mutual dependence, and a collective reliance on divine favor, a recognition of their common vulnerability and shared destiny. Their lives were interconnected, a tightly woven fabric of mutual support, profound understanding, and shared humanity. By midday, the sun beat down with a relentless, almost oppressive intensity, and a thick, honest sweat plastered Dmitri's homespun tunic to his broad, muscular back. His muscles ached, but it was a satisfying ache. The honest weariness of a day well spent. A bodily affirmation of purpose, of meaningful exertion. Anna arrived from the village with Fyodor and Maria, carrying a woven basket with their midday meal. A welcome respite from the arduous labor. Fyodor, a sturdy boy of 7, with his father's serious, contemplative eyes and an eager, insatiable curiosity, immediately ran to the edge of the field, pretending to wield an imaginary scythe, mimicking his father's powerful, practiced movements with an endearing earnestness. Maria, a bright-eyed girl of 5, her hair like spun flax, clung to her mother's skirt, observing the vastness of the field with wide-eyed wonder, pointing at every new discovery, her small voice filled with innocent delight. They ate beneath the generous shade of a lone, ancient oak tree that stood like a silent sentinel at the edge of their plot. Its gnarled, immense branches offering a precious respite from the harsh, relentless sun. Anna had prepared simple rye bread, dense and flavorful, its crust firm and wholesome, some cured meat, perhaps a bit of salted fish, and kvass, a fermented drink, refreshing and tangy, drawn from their own cool, dark cellar. The food tasted glorious, imbued with the flavor of honest effort, earned through the tireless labor of their hands and bodies. Dmitri watched his children as they ate, his heart swelling with a quiet tenderness, a profound sense of paternal love that transcended words. Fyodor, already showing a nascent understanding of the land, asked questions about the hay, about the horses, about the subtle difference between wheat and rye, his mind eager to absorb the wisdom of his elders. Maria, less concerned with the practicalities of agriculture, pointed at a brightly colored butterfly flitting amongst the wildflowers, her laughter like tiny bells, a pure, unadulterated sound of joy that echoed through the quiet field. These were the moments Dmitri cherished most. The simple, unadorned beauty of his family. The quiet, harmonious unfolding of their lives. Each day a small, perfect unit of existence, complete in itself. The hay will be heavy this year, Dima, Anna observed, her voice soft, her gaze sweeping over the meticulously cut rows. A quiet satisfaction in her tone. God has blessed us with abundance. Indeed, Dmitri agreed, looking first at the rows of cut grass, then at the vast, cloudless sky, his heart filled with a quiet gratitude. We must make good use of his generosity. For winter will come, and it will demand its due. Ivan Petrovich, who had eaten in silence, his thoughts seemingly far away, perhaps dwelling on past harvests or future seasons, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a gesture of finality. The land demands respect. Boys, he said, directing his words to Fyodor, who was listening intently, his eyes fixed on his grandfather, absorbing every word. It gives, but it takes, and it asks for patience. Always patience, and hard work. It rewards those who are diligent and punishes those who are lazy. His voice was firm, resonant with the distilled wisdom of generations of peasant life, a truth as immutable as the earth itself. After their meal, a brief, precious respite from the sun's relentless heat. The work resumed, slower now under the oppressive warmth, but just as persistent, just as necessary. Dmitri felt the subtle shifts in the wind, read the clouds for any nascent sign of rain, listened to the distant rumble of carts on the road, knowing each sound held a particular, vital meaning for their livelihood, for the delicate balance of their existence. He was attuned to the earth in a way that city folk, with their bustling streets and artificial lights, their hurried, disconnected lives, could never comprehend. His knowledge was not gleaned from books or abstract theories, but from generations of lived experience, passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, encoded in his very being, in the calluses on his hands, in the lines on his face. This profound connection gave him an immense, almost spiritual sense of belonging, a feeling of being part of something vast and ancient and enduring. A direct, unbroken link to the very source of life itself. As the sun began its slow, majestic descent in the western sky, painting the clouds in breathtaking hues of orange, purple, and fiery red, a celestial masterpiece, the arduous work of cutting hay slowly drew to a close. The sweet, fresh scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the damp, rich earth, a primal, comforting aroma that promised sustenance and survival through the coming cold. Dmitri felt a profound satisfaction in the sight of their fields. Neatly shorn, the hay gathered into fragrant piles, resembling small, golden haystacks, ready for baling in the coming days. It was the deep, quiet satisfaction of honest effort, of a task completed under God's watchful eye, a testament to their diligence and His boundless grace. They walked back to the village as twilight began to fall, the air growing cooler, carrying the distant bleating of sheep from a shepherd's flock and the lowing of cattle returning to their barns. Their bells clinking softly in the gathering dusk. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight, unwavering columns, promising warm hearths and evening meals. A visible, comforting sign of life and domestic tranquility. The church bell tolled, a single, resonant note echoing across the vast, open fields, calling the faithful to evening prayer or simply marking the sacred passage of time. A constant, comforting sound that had defined their lives for centuries. A timeless anchor in a world of flux. In the izba, the lamp was lit, its small, flickering flame casting a warm, inviting glow that danced on the rough-hewn walls, chasing away the encroaching shadows. Anna was preparing dinner, shchi, a hearty cabbage soup, simmering gently over the hearth, filling the room with its rich, savory aroma, a promise of warmth and nourishment. Fyodor, tired but content from his day of helping in the fields, was showing Maria a small carved horse he had made from a piece of scrap wood. His small fingers surprisingly deft and precise for his age. The simple, comforting sounds of domesticity filled the small space, the gentle crackle of the fire, the low murmur of voices, the quiet clatter of pots and spoons. A symphony of home. Dmitri washed his hands and face in a basin of cool, clear water, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of the day, feeling the refreshing coolness on his skin. He then sat down at the rough-hewn table, feeling the familiar comfort of his home envelop him, a sense of belonging so deep it was almost painful in its intensity. This was his sanctuary, his world, a world built on simple, unyielding truths, on the bedrock of faith and family. Here, amidst the quiet love of his family, he felt secure, complete, utterly at peace, a feeling that transcended all earthly possessions. Dinner was a quiet affair, marked by the steady clinking of spoons against wooden bowls, the shared silence of people who understood each other without the need for constant words. Ivan Petrovich ate with the same deliberate concentration he applied to his work, occasionally offering a pronouncement or an observation about the day. "The soil was good today," he would say, his voice deep and resonant. Or, "The horses worked well. They are strong." These were not idle comments but profound affirmations of the day's successes. A quiet gratitude for life's continuity. A recognition of God's providence. A silent acknowledgement of their blessings. He ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, a habit born of a life where food was never taken for granted, where every morsel was a gift. After dinner, as Anna cleared the table, her movements efficient and graceful, her presence a calming force, Dmitri took Fyodor onto his lap. The boy leaned against him, his small body warm and familiar. A comforting weight. "What did you see today, son?" he asked, his voice gentle, encouraging, inviting the boy to share his world. Fyodor, his serious eyes wide with the day's discoveries, recounted the butterfly with painted wings, the industrious buzzing of the diligent bees in the wildflowers, the immense strength of the horses pulling the scythe, his voice filled with innocent wonder. Dmitri listened patiently, answering his questions about the land, about the plants, about the intricate workings of the world around them, patiently explaining the cycle of growth and harvest, the delicate balance of nature. He believed deeply in teaching his children the ways of the land, the profound importance of hard work, and the unwavering truth of God's benevolent hand in all things. These were not just lessons, they were the very fabric of existence. The sacred inheritance he sought to pass on, ensuring the continuity of their way of life, the preservation of their traditions. Later, as the children were tucked into their pallets, their breathing soft and even in sleep, their small forms peaceful in the dim light, Dmitri and Anna sat by the dying embers of the fire. The day's arduous labors had left them both weary, but a peaceful quiet settled between them, a profound comfort born of deep understanding, of years of shared experience. Anna began to mend a tear in Fyodor's tunic. her needles moving deftly and rhythmically in the dim light, the soft scratching of the thread the only sound in the quiet izba. Dmitri watched her, his gaze filled with affection, with a quiet admiration for her endless industry, her tireless devotion, and her unwavering spirit. "The boy asked many questions today," Dmitri murmured, his voice soft, a hint of paternal pride in his tone, a quiet joy in his heart. "He takes after you," Anna replied, without looking up from her meticulous work, a gentle smile playing on her lips, always seeking to understand the world around him. "He has your serious mind, Dima." A comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated only by the soft click of Anna's needles and the occasional crackle of the dying fire. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a testament to years of shared life, shared joys, and shared sorrows, however few and distant those sorrows had been in the quietude of Krasnoe. Their life was simple, unadorned, lacking the luxuries and complexities of the distant city, but it was rich in meaning, rooted in the ancient traditions of their people, sanctified by their profound, unshakable faith. Dmitri's faith was not a matter of intellectual inquiry or theological debate. He had neither the education nor the inclination for such abstract pursuits. It was a lived experience, woven into the very fabric of his being, as essential as the blood that flowed through his veins, as natural as the rising of the sun. He saw God's hand in the abundance of the harvest, in the miraculous resilience of the wheat pushing through the soil after the harsh, unforgiving winter, in the profound miracle of childbirth, and in the steadfast, unyielding love of his family. He believed in the simple, immutable tenets of his Orthodox Church, in humility, in compassion, in forgiveness, and in the ultimate triumph of good over evil, of light over darkness. He believed that every man had a sacred duty, first to God, then to his family, and then to his community, a duty to live a life of purpose and righteousness. These duties were clear, unambiguous, and provided the moral compass by which he navigated his life, a constant, unerring guide in a world that, though seemingly simple, held its own subtle complexities. He thought of the church, its modest wooden dome rising above the village rooftops, a quiet, humble sentinel against the vastness of the steppe, its cross a visible, unwavering declaration of their collective belief, a beacon of hope. Every Sunday, they gathered there, the entire village, their voices rising in ancient, resonant hymns, their bodies bowed in communal prayer, the sacred scent of beeswax candles and old incense filling the air. A spiritual balm. It was a ritual that bound them, reminding them of their shared humanity, their common destiny, and their collective reliance on a higher power that transcended the temporal, the fleeting concerns of earthly life. Father Sergei, the village priest, though often weary and humble, spoke words that resonated deeply within Dmitri's soul, affirming the truths that he felt instinctively in his heart, truths that had sustained his ancestors for generations, providing comfort and guidance. Their village, Krasnoe, was a microcosm of this larger Russian reality, a small, self-contained world, seemingly untouched by the tumultuous currents of history. It had seen generations come and go, empires rise and fall, great battles fought and forgotten, but its fundamental way of life remained largely unchanged, a testament to its enduring resilience. The cycles of nature, the rhythm of labor, the solace of faith, the enduring bonds of family and community, these were the constants, the immovable pillars of their existence, the very bedrock upon which their lives were built. They were insulated, to a degree, from the grand movements of history, from the political intrigues of distant Petersburg or the clamor of European capitals. Their concerns were more immediate, more tangible, the whims of the weather, the success of the harvest, the health of their livestock, the well-being and future of their children, the simple, profound necessities of daily life. The distant world, with its czars and generals, its treaties and declarations of war, seemed a vague, almost mythical concept, something that belonged to an entirely different realm, far removed from the dirt under Dmitri's fingernails and the warmth of his hearth. A world that existed only in whispers and fragmented rumors. As the lamp flickered, its small flame weakening, and finally died, casting the izba into soft, comforting darkness, Dmitri lay beside Anna, listening to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of his sleeping family, a symphony of peace that filled the small space. He felt a profound gratitude. A deep, quiet contentment that filled him to the brim. A sense of inner peace that transcended all earthly understanding. His world was small, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things. But it was whole, complete in its simplicity, rich in its meaning. It was built on the solid ground of hard work, unwavering faith, and the enduring love of his family. He closed his eyes, the scent of hay and wood smoke a lullaby, the familiar comfort of his home a tangible blessing, a sacred sanctuary. He drifted into sleep, his dreams likely filled with the vast, open fields, the sweet scent of fresh hay, the rhythmic swing of the scythe, and the beloved faces of his family, their smiles bright in the sun. He was utterly unaware of the unseen storms that were already gathering on the distant horizon, preparing to test the very core of his steadfast heart, to challenge the foundations of his world. The world, indeed, was larger and more complex than the tranquil boundaries of Krasnoe, and soon its distant echoes would reach even this quiet corner of Russia, demanding a reckoning, pulling Dmitri from his peaceful existence into the tumultuous, unforgiving currents of history. But for now, peace reigned, and Dmitri's heart, innocent and full of faith, rested in its comforting embrace, untroubled by what the coming dawns would bring, by the trials that awaited him in the vast, unknown future. His was a peace born of simplicity, of profound connection to the earth and to God. A peace that would soon be tested in ways he could not yet fathom. Chapter 2. Whispers from afar. The shadow of empire. The summer days in Krasnoe continued their tranquil unfolding, each sunrise mirroring the last in its promise of arduous, honest toil and the comforting rhythm of life tethered to the land. The hay harvest had been gathered with fervent diligence, the golden bales now stacked high in the barns, emitting a sweet, dry fragrance that spoke of winter's coming provisions. The rye stood tall in the fields, its heavy head swaying in the gentle breeze, promising a bountiful yield. Dmitri Ivanovich Volkov, with his family and neighbors, continued to immerse himself in the ceaseless labor of the land, his mind and body attuned to its demands, his heart still a vessel of unwavering peace, brimming with gratitude for the simple, profound blessings of his existence. The distant world, with its grand palaces and its intricate, often brutal, affairs of state, seemed as remote and mythical as the constellations that wheeled across the night sky above Krasnoe. Yet, even in this secluded corner of the vast Russian Empire, where time flowed with the languid pace of the river and the seasons dictated the very breath of life, the invisible tendrils of that distant world, unseen and unheeded, were beginning their slow, inexorable creep. It began subtly, as all great changes often do, not with a sudden, jarring upheaval, but with whispers. The first whispers were so faint, so indistinct, that they were easily dismissed as mere echoes of the wider world's perennial unrest. Tales spun by restless minds. They arrived not in official decrees or shouted proclamations, but in the casual, almost reluctant words of travelers, in the strained silences of merchants passing through, in the altered demeanor of the rare returning seasonal worker who had ventured beyond the familiar horizons of the gubernia. One hot, dust-laden afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly upon the fields, searing the air with its intensity, a cart rumbled into Krasnoe. It was not the usual peddler's cart, laden with brightly colored fabrics or simple wares, but a more substantial vehicle, drawn by a single, gaunt horse, its flanks streaked with sweat. Atop it sat a man Dmitri recognized, a grain merchant named Prokhor Mikhailovich, who usually passed through Krasnoe on his way to the larger market towns. Prokhor was a man of plump build, with a booming laugh and eyes that usually sparkled with shrewd calculation and robust good humor. But today, his face was drawn, his usual joviality replaced by a grim pallor, and his eyes, though still quick, held a disquieting weariness. He stopped his cart near the communal well, where a group of village women, including Anna, were drawing water, their buckets clinking softly. Prokhor dismounted stiffly, wiping his brow with a tattered sleeve. His usual boisterous greeting was absent. Instead, he exchanged a few hushed words with the village elder, Mikhail Semyonovich, whose wizened face, usually serene, now took on a deeply troubled expression. The women, noticing the change in Prokhor, stopped their chatter, their movements growing hesitant. A stillness, heavier than the summer heat, settled over the well. Dmitri, having finished his work in the nearby fields, was leading Zorka back to the stable, her gentle steps kicking up small clouds of dust. He saw the unusual cluster by the well, felt the sudden, palpable tension in the air. His father, Ivan Petrovich, had also emerged from their izba, drawn by the unusual silence, his keen eyes instantly assessing the scene. "What news, Prokhor Mikhailovich?" Ivan Petrovich's voice, though low, carried the weight of expectation. Prokhor looked around, his gaze lingering on the faces of the villagers, young and old, their eyes fixed upon him. He took a deep, shaky breath, and the words that tumbled out were not loud, but they carried a terrifying clarity in the afternoon quiet. "War," he said, his voice hoarse. "A great war, beyond the borders, with the Turks, and the Tsar. He calls for more men. Many men. There are notices in Bolshoi Lippy, in Staro, notices for the conscription." A gasp rippled through the gathered women. The clinking of buckets ceased entirely. Dmitri felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. War. He had heard the word before, of course. Read about it in the few tattered books Father Sergei kept in the church. But it had always been a thing of distant history. A grand, tragic spectacle belonging to other times, other places. It had no place in Krasnoe, in the quiet, predictable rhythm of their lives. Ivan Petrovich's face, usually so impassive, tightened almost imperceptibly. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. "So it begins again," he murmured, his voice heavy with a weary resignation that spoke of personal memory, of a distant past Dmitri could only vaguely grasp. Prokhor, emboldened by Ivan Petrovich's quiet acceptance, continued, speaking quickly, as if to rid himself of the burden of the news. "They say it's for God and Tsar, for the Orthodox faith against the infidels. But the peasants, they are being taken from their fields. Villages are left with only women and old men. The quotas are high, higher than anyone remembers." He spoke of rumors of skirmishes, of new technologies, of terrible losses. Words that conjured images of chaos and destruction far beyond the comprehension of Krasnoe. Anna, who had been listening intently, her hand unconsciously pressing against her mouth, turned to Dmitri, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning fear. Dmitri met her gaze, and in it, he saw his own nascent anxiety reflected. Fyodor and Maria, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation, continued to play quietly nearby, their innocent laughter a jarring counterpoint to the somber news. The news spread through Krasnoe like a brushfire, igniting pockets of fear and apprehension wherever it touched. That evening, the usual sounds of evening chatter and children's games were subdued. Families huddled in their izbas, their voices lowered, discussing Prokhor's words. The distant war was no longer a mythical concept, it had taken on a tangible, terrifying shape, threatening to reach out and pluck men from their familiar lives. Dmitri felt a disquiet he had never known. His profound detachment, a cornerstone of his peaceful existence, began to crumble. He had always believed in the divine order, in the benevolent hand that guided their lives. But the idea of conscription, of men being torn from their families to die in a foreign land for a cause they barely understood, struck at the very core of this belief. Where was God's hand in such suffering? He watched Anna, her face clouded with worry, her hands moving less surely as she prepared their simple meal. He looked at his children, at Fyodor, sturdy and curious, who would soon be a young man, perhaps standing where Dmitri stood now. He thought of Maria, her laughter like tiny bells, still innocent of the world's harshness, her small face radiating an unblemished joy, and a primal fear, sharp and cold, pierced his heart. It was a terror not for his own life, for Dmitri was not a man to fear death itself, but for the fracturing of his sacred world, for the potential ruin of all he held dear, for the inevitable suffering of those he loved. After dinner, Ivan Petrovich sat by the hearth, stoking the dying embers, his face illuminated by the flickering light, deep in thought, his features carved by decades of stoic endurance. Dmitri, unable to settle, his spirit restless with unvoiced questions, joined him, his mind churning with a torrent of anxieties. "Father," Dmitri began, his voice hesitant, almost a whisper, "this war, what is it for? And these quotas, they will reach us?" Ivan Petrovich sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of generations of peasant suffering, of historical burdens. Wars are always for something. Dima, for land, for faith, for the Tsar's pride, for the whims of distant men. Sometimes, for nothing at all but the folly of human ambition. As for the quotas, they always reach. The Tsar's arm is long, and its grasp eventually finds every corner of the empire, reaching even into the most secluded villages like ours. He paused, his gaze fixed on the glowing embers, as if seeing visions within the shifting flames. I was but a young man, younger than you, when I was taken, to fight for the Tsar, far to the south, against tribes whose names I cannot recall. It was a lifetime ago. Yet the dust of those roads, the smell of gunpowder, the stench of fear, they linger still in the deepest chambers of my memory. Dmitri looked at his father, seeing him not just as the stern, traditional patriarch, but as a man who had walked through fire, whose quiet strength had been forged in a crucible he could only imagine. A reality of terror and endurance. "Were you afraid, father?" Dmitri asked, his voice barely audible, compelled by a need for understanding. Ivan Petrovich turned his gaze to Dmitri, his eyes holding a distant, knowing sadness that seemed to encompass all the sorrows of the world. "Fear is a companion in war. Dima. It walks beside you, it sleeps beside you, it gnaws at your insides. But a man learns to master it, or it masters him completely. You learn to put one foot in front of the other, even when every fiber of your being screams for you to flee. You learn to pray, even when your tongue feels thick with ash and your faith feels like a fragile thread. And you learn the value of home, of family, of the very soil you tend, more than you ever knew it before. For that is what you fight for, truly, when all the grand words of glory and empire are stripped away. When only the raw, visceral reality of survival remains." His words, simple and direct, painted a stark, vivid picture of a reality Dmitri had never encountered. A reality far removed from the gentle rhythms and predictable patterns of Krasnoe. A reality that now loomed on his own horizon. The following days saw the village steeped in a new kind of anxiety. A quiet dread that settled like a persistent fog. The usual communal spirit, while not entirely broken, was subtly altered. Conversations were less boisterous, laughter less frequent, replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. Men gathered by the well, their faces grim, their shoulders hunched, speculating endlessly about the Tsar's needs, about the true distance of the fighting, about the dreaded arrival of the UKAZ, the official decree that would name the conscripts and tear them from their homes. Women, their hands busy with their endless, essential tasks, kneading dough, spinning wool, mending clothes, cast worried glances at their sons and husbands, their hearts heavy with unspoken dread, their prayers more fervent than ever before. The children, sensitive to the subtle shift in adult moods, seemed to sense the pervasive unease, their games growing quieter, their laughter less frequent, their innocent faces reflecting the shadow that had fallen over their world. Dmitri found his thoughts increasingly distracted. Even in the fields, his connection to the land, once so complete and untroubled, now felt tenuous, overshadowed by the unseen threat that hovered like a predator. He would pause, scythe in hand, and look out across the vast expanse of the golden rye fields, a shimmering sea stretching to the horizon, and imagine soldiers marching across it, their heavy boots trampling the golden bounty, leaving a trail of destruction. The vision was jarring, a violent intrusion upon the serene landscape of his mind, a desecration of the sacred. He would force himself to refocus, to plunge back into the work, seeking solace in the familiar, rhythmic swing of physical labor. But the seed of anxiety, once sown, had begun to sprout, sending its roots deep into the fertile soil of his soul. One market day, a week later, when Dmitri went to Bolshy Lippy, the district town, to sell some of their surplus vegetables and eggs, the atmosphere there was even more charged, buzzing with an agitated energy. Bolshy Lippy was a larger town, a hub where news, both true and exaggerated, circulated freely through the bustling streets and crowded market stalls. The central square was bustling, as always, but a palpable tension hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Groups of men stood huddled together, their voices low, their gestures animated, their faces etched with worry. On the whitewashed wall of the district office, a stark, freshly pasted notice, emblazoned with the imperial double-headed eagle, caught Dmitri's eye. It was indeed in UKAZ, proclaiming the Tsar's urgent need for new recruits, detailing the precise quotas for each district, including theirs. The words were formal, bureaucratic, cold, but their meaning was brutally clear, utterly undeniable. Sons, brothers, husbands would be taken. It was an inevitable, impersonal decree, descending from a distant, unseen power, yet it would shatter countless individual lives, leaving behind indelible marks of sorrow and loss. Dmitri stood for a long moment, reading the words, his mind struggling to fully grasp their terrifying implications, his heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. The paper seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, a direct threat to his very existence. He saw men around him, their faces pale, their eyes filled with a mixture of dread and grim resignation. Some turned away quickly, as if to deny the reality of the proclamation, to wish it away. Others stood transfixed, their shoulders slumped in defeat, their gazes fixed on the words that would decide their fates. He heard snippets of conversation, of villages already sending off their men, of tearful goodbyes at dusty crossroads, of families left to fend for themselves with only their women and the very old. The war was no longer just a rumor from Prokhor, it was a cold, official fact, confirmed by imperial decree, its reach extending to every corner of their lives. He returned to Krasnoe that evening, the weight of the UKAZ heavy in his mind. His usual market-day cheer utterly absent, replaced by a profound weariness. The familiar path seemed different, tinged with a new somberness, as if the very earth mourned with him. As he approached the village, he saw the smoke rising from the chimneys, the familiar outlines of the izbas, the church dome glinting faintly in the fading light, and for the first time, a profound sense of its fragility gripped him. This peace, this simple, blessed life, was not immutable. It could be taken, shattered by forces beyond their control, by the unseen hand of an empire. He told Anna and his father what he had seen. Anna listened, her face growing paler with each word, her eyes widening with a dawning horror. She began to weep softly, her shoulders shaking, not with loud, dramatic sobs, but with a quiet, profound grief, as if already mourning a loss, a future that would never be. Dmitri tried to comfort her, holding her close, pressing her head to his shoulder. But his own heart was a knot of icy apprehension, a core of fear that refused to dissipate. Ivan Petrovich, however, remained outwardly stoic. He sat by the hearth, gazing into the flames, his face a mask of ancient wisdom and grim acceptance, betraying nothing of the turmoil within. It was inevitable, Ivan Petrovich said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, almost a sigh. It has always been thus. Since time immemorial, the land feeds us, but the Tsar claims our sons. It is the balance, the bitter truth of our existence. The old ones remember this cycle, this inescapable burden. He spoke of the Tsar's need, of Russia's honor, of the sacred duty of Orthodox men to defend their faith and their homeland. But beneath the stoicism, Dmitri detected a subtle tremor in his father's voice, a deep, underlying sorrow that spoke of past sufferings, of a lifetime of witnessing such burdens, of a profound understanding of the human cost of empire. Over the next few weeks, the shadow deepened, lengthening its reach over Krasnoe. The UKAZ was officially read aloud by Father Sergei after Sunday liturgy, his voice trembling slightly as he delivered the grim news, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a visible anguish. The quotas were indeed high. 4 men from Krasnoe would be taken. 4 lives from this small, interconnected community, plucked from their families, from their fields, to face the unknown horrors of war. A collective gasp, then a wave of quiet, desperate weeping swept through the church, the sound of muffled sobs filling the sacred space. The air grew heavy with unspoken fears, with the profound, suffocating weight of human vulnerability, of lives poised on the precipice of an abyss. Dmitri felt a cold dread as the names of the district's villages were read. And then, finally, the number for Krasnoe. His eyes instinctively sought Anna's. Then his father's. The names of the conscripts were not yet known, they would be decided by lot. A cruel game of chance that held the lives of their men in its indifferent, arbitrary hands. The waiting became an agonizing torture. each passing day an eternity. Every man between the ages of 20 and 35 lived under the silent threat. Knowing that his name could be called, that his life could be irrevocably altered in an instant, that the quiet rhythm of his existence could be shattered without warning. The communal well, once a place of lively gossip and shared laughter, became a site of hushed, anxious conversations. Women would ask each other, in voices barely above a whisper, if they had heard anything more specific, if anyone had had a premonition, a dream, a sign of who might be taken. The men, when they gathered, spoke of the Tsar's army, of the distant war, of the strange, unpronounceable names of battles in foreign lands. They spoke of the unfairness of it all, of their longing for peace, for the return of the familiar order, but always with an underlying resignation, an acceptance of their fate as simple folk in a vast, indifferent empire. They spoke of prayers, of fasting, of seeking divine intervention. But their eyes often betrayed a deep, weary cynicism born of generations of hardship. Dmitri found his sleep troubled by fragmented dreams of marching men, of unfamiliar landscapes cloaked in smoke, of desperate faces he did not know. He would wake suddenly, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, his body slick with cold sweat, and lie listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of Anna and the children, the sounds of his peaceful life now tinged with a new, acute preciousness, a fragile beauty that he feared could be snatched away at any moment. His faith, once so simple and unshakable, now faced its first serious test, a crucible that burned away the dross of youthful certainty. He prayed with more fervor, with a deeper, more desperate sincerity than ever before, begging for protection, for deliverance, for understanding in the face of such inexplicable suffering. He asked God for strength, not to avoid the test, but to endure it, whatever it might be, to walk through the fire with his soul intact. He observed his father, Ivan Petrovich, during these anxious weeks. The old man, though showing no outward signs of panic or despair, moved with a newfound gravity. He spent more time in contemplation, often sitting on the bench outside their izba, gazing out at the fields, his face a landscape of unspoken thoughts, his mind wrestling with the burdens of past and present. One evening, Dmitri saw him polishing his old army rifle, a relic from his own distant service, with a meticulous, almost ritualistic care, his gnarled fingers tracing the cold metal. It was a silent gesture, but one that spoke volumes about memory, about the continuity of struggle, about a readiness to face what must be faced, a quiet acceptance of the burdens passed down through generations. They used to sing songs, Father, Dmitri remarked, his voice quiet, almost mournful, when men were taken, songs of sorrow, of glory. Ivan Petrovich grunted, a sound of grim amusement. Songs are for the living, Dima, for those who remain to remember, to mourn, to hope. The dead have no need of songs, only the silent earth, but they have need of prayers, always prayers, for their journey to the other side. And the living have need of courage, of steadfastness, for the burdens left behind. His words held a profound, sobering truth, a stark reminder of the realities of war and loss. The natural world, too, seemed to reflect the unsettling change that had descended upon Krasnoe. The vibrant green of early summer had begun to give way to the richer, heavier hues of late summer. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift towards autumn's more somber palette. The heat remained, but there was a new stillness in the air, a sense of waiting, as if even the very earth held its breath in anticipation. The flies buzzed with an unusual, almost frantic ferocity, and the sunsets, though beautiful in their fiery grandeur, often seemed to blaze with an intensity that felt ominous, a portent of unrest and upheaval rather than peace. The wind, which usually carried the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers, now seemed to carry a faint, metallic tang, a distant echo of the approaching storm. The village gathered more frequently for communal prayers in the church, led by Father Sergei, whose voice, once so clear and resonant, now carried a distinct tremor. His eyes often red-rimmed from sleepless nights. He spoke of the Tsar's divine right, of holy war, of the martyrdom of soldiers, trying with all his spiritual might to instill courage and a sense of sacred duty in the hearts of his trembling flock. Yet, even his impassioned words, though deeply felt, could not entirely dispel the palpable fear that permeated the small, wooden church, clinging to the ancient icons and the very air. Dmitri listened, his head bowed, his heart heavy. He believed in God, in the Tsar, in Holy Russia. But the grand, abstract notions of empire and holy war felt impossibly distant, utterly removed from the tangible reality of his calloused hands. The comforting warmth of Anna's embrace, the pure, unadulterated laughter of his children. His duty felt simpler, clearer: to protect his family, to tend his land, to live a righteous life in harmony with God's creation. How could these immediate, sacred duties reconcile with the impersonal demands of a distant war, with the cold decrees of a vast, unseen government? This internal struggle became a constant companion for Dmitri, a relentless battle waged within the confines of his own soul. He sought solace in the familiar rhythms of work, hoping to drown out the insistent whispers of anxiety, to silence the clamor of his fears. He would plunge his hands into the rich, dark soil, feeling its cool, living energy, trying to ground himself in its unwavering permanence, its timeless cycle of life and death. He would swing his scythe with renewed vigor, the physical exertion a temporary balm to his troubled mind, a momentary release from the gnawing dread. But the thoughts persisted, circling like persistent, unwelcome flies, clinging to the edges of his consciousness. What if his name was drawn? What would become of Anna, of young Fyodor, of tiny Maria? Who would tend the fields? Who would guide the plow? Who would protect them from the merciless harshness of winter? From the relentless grip of hunger? The responsibility weighed on him, a burden far heavier than any harvest, a burden that crushed his spirit. Anna, with the intuitive sensitivity of a devoted wife whose life was inextricably bound to his, sensed the depth of his unspoken fears, the silent anguish that consumed him. She would touch his arm gently, or meet his gaze with a look of profound understanding and quiet empathy, her eyes mirroring his own worry. One night, as they lay in the dark, the izba filled with the comforting sounds of their children's soft breathing, she whispered, her voice barely audible, "Whatever comes, Dima, we face it together. God will guide us, for He is ever merciful. And I will stand by you. Always." Her words, simple and unwavering, were a small comfort in the vastness of his dread, a fragile anchor in a tempest-tossed sea. Her faith, too, was absolute, perhaps even more so than his, for it lacked the logical questioning that even his simple mind could not entirely suppress when confronted with such profound injustice and inexplicable suffering. The days stretched into weeks, each one bringing new rumors, new uncertainties, new anxieties. A man from a neighboring village, Ivan Yakovlev, returned from market with news that the quota had been lowered in some distant gubernias due to an unexpected surge in volunteers. A piece of news quickly followed by the counter-rumor that the quota was actually being increased in their district to compensate for failures in other regions. The air was thick with speculation, contradiction, and a desperate, almost pathetic hope that this bitter cup might somehow pass them by. That their small, forgotten village might be spared. They spoke of brothers, of cousins, of sons of friends who had already been taken. Their names now whispered with reverence and sorrow. Their fates a grim reminder of the war's far-reaching grasp. The war, previously a distant thunder on the horizon, was now a storm directly overhead, its first cold, unforgiving drops already beginning to fall on their peaceful world. Dmitri found himself watching the main road into the village with an involuntary tension each day. His gaze scanning the horizon, dreading the sight of a government courier, a uniformed soldier, or any official figure that might bring the definitive, terrifying news that would shatter their fragile peace. The sense of being a small, insignificant part of a vast, unfeeling machine began to creep into his consciousness, challenging the deep-seated peasant belief in their own self-sufficiency and the direct, benevolent relationship between their toil and God's grace. It was an unsettling feeling. This realization of his own powerlessness in the face of imperial decree, of forces so immense they seemed almost divine in their unstoppable nature. Ivan Petrovich, in his quiet moments, would speak of the necessity of obedience to the Tsar, for the Tsar was God's anointed on earth, and his commands, though harsh, must ultimately be for the good of Holy Russia, for the preservation of their Orthodox faith. It is our lot, Dima, he would say, his voice lacking bitterness, only a deep, weary resignation. The peasant works, The Tsar commands. It has always been thus. Since the days of old. Do not question the will of heaven or the will of our earthly father. For their wisdom is beyond our understanding. Accept what is given. His words, imbued with generations of fatalism, offered a certain bleak comfort, a framework for acceptance, a path towards stoic endurance. But they did not entirely extinguish the burning anxiety in Dmitri's heart. For Dmitri's heart was still young and longed for justice, for peace. The children, too, began to sense the change that had descended upon their home. Fyodor, usually so boisterous and full of life, became quieter, watching his father and grandfather with a new, unsettling solemnity, his young brow furrowed in uncomprehending worry. Maria, less able to articulate her feelings, would cling more often to Anna's skirt, her small hand seeking reassurance, her bright eyes wide with a generalized fear she could not name. The unspoken fears of the adults cast a subtle pall over their innocent games. A pervasive atmosphere they could not name but acutely felt. Like a coming storm, Dmitri longed desperately to shield them from this encroaching shadow, to preserve their innocent hearts, their unblemished joy. But he knew, with a growing, cold certainty, that the world was too vast, and the arm of the Tsar too long, too powerful. The harvest continued, but with a different spirit. The usual joy of abundance, the communal celebration of nature's bounty, was now tinged with a solemn apprehension. Every sheaf of rye gathered, every potato dug from the rich, dark earth, was done with a frantic, desperate energy, as if to secure as much as possible before the inevitable unknown arrived. Before lives were irrevocably changed, they worked under the vast, indifferent sky, their movements now infused not just with purpose, but with a silent prayer for deliverance, a hope that their continued diligence might somehow appease the distant forces that threatened to consume them. The gentle soil, which had always been their comfort and their sustenance, now seemed to hold within it the potential for disruption, for the painful, violent uprooting of lives. Dmitri remembered Father Sergei's sermon from the previous Sunday, a powerful, albeit strained, address about the nature of sacrifice. For Holy Russia, the priest had intoned, his voice echoing in the small wooden church, its timbers seeming to absorb the weight of his words. For the Orthodox faith, for the Tsar, to give one's life is the highest honor, a path to eternal salvation, a martyr's crown. Dmitri had listened, head bowed, trying to reconcile these grand, abstract concepts with the tangible reality of his calloused hands, his loving family, the specific, individual life he held so dear. A life rooted in the soil and the simple virtues. He believed in salvation, yes, but he also believed in the sacredness of life lived fully on earth. In the simple, profound joy of children's laughter. In the comforting warmth of a shared bed. In the quiet dignity of a life lived in harmony with God's creation. The two paths, the sacred and the earthly, the path of a martyr and the path of a peasant, suddenly seemed to diverge, pulling at his soul, creating a profound spiritual dilemma. The days shortened imperceptibly, the first cool breezes of autumn beginning to stir the leaves in the birch grove, causing them to whisper secrets amongst themselves. The air, once thick with the buzzing of insects, grew quieter, a prelude to the coming cold. The golden light of summer deepened into a richer, more melancholy hue, casting long shadows across the fields, shadows that seemed to stretch from the distant horizon, carrying with them a sense of impending doom. This transition, usually a time of quiet reflection and gratitude for the harvest, was now imbued with a somber foreboding. Each setting sun felt like a step closer to the inevitable, to the dreaded arrival of the official conscription commission that would turn speculation into brutal reality. That would seal the fates of the men of Krasnoe. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the drawing of lots, the ancient, agonizing method by which conscripts were chosen. It was a cruel lottery, a roll of the dice in which God's will was supposedly revealed, but which felt to the men like a game played by an indifferent, distant power, a capricious fate. Each family with a man of military age lived under a cloud of suspense. A collective breath held, waiting for the decree that would shatter one home to preserve another, to send one son to war while another remained. Dmitri's heart, once so innocent and untroubled, was now burdened with the burgeoning weight of uncertainty, a profound disquiet that settled deep within his chest. He found himself studying Fyodor more closely, imagining the boy growing into a man, wondering if he, too, would one day face such a terrifying summons. If this cycle of sacrifice would repeat itself endlessly. The thought was unbearable, a future horror that cast a long shadow over the present innocence. Over the pure joy of his son's childhood. He felt a fierce, protective instinct rise within him, a desperate desire to shield his family from the world's harshness, to preserve the sanctity of their life in Krasnoe, to keep them safe in this fragile haven. But he also knew, with a growing, cold certainty, that the Tsar's arm, however distant, was long, and its grasp, once extended, was inescapable, that the demands of empire would eventually reach every peasant hearth. The shadow of the empire, once a mere whisper on the wind, was now falling squarely upon Krasnoe, upon his family, upon his very soul. And in the quiet nights, as he lay beside Anna, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of his children, Dmitri prayed not just for deliverance from this impending doom, but for the profound strength to face whatever the encroaching darkness might bring. To remain steadfast in his faith and in his duties, even when the world around him seemed to crumble. His innocent heart was no longer entirely innocent. It was now touched by the vastness of human sorrow and the relentless march of history. Chapter 3. A father's legacy and a son's duty. The decree had been proclaimed, its stark words echoing from the church doors and the district office walls. A chilling pronouncement of the Tsar's demand. 4 men from Krasnoe, wrested from their fields, from their families, were to be delivered to the vast, hungry maw of war. But the names, the specific, individual names, remained as yet unchosen, veiled by the capriciousness of fate and the arbitrary mechanics of the lot. This period of agonizing anticipation, stretching day by day, hour by hour, felt to Dmitri Ivanovich Volkov less like a mere passage of time and more like a viscous, suffocating dream. The initial tremor from the distant conflict, once easily dismissed, had now solidified into a pervasive dread. A cold anxiety that settled deep in the bones of the village. And, most acutely, in his own steadfast, yet increasingly troubled, heart, Dmitri found himself caught in a profound spiritual and moral grapple, an internal wrestling match that consumed his waking hours and haunted his fitful sleep. His existence, hitherto a seamless tapestry woven from the threads of earth, family, and unwavering faith, was now rent by a formidable dichotomy. On one side stood the immutable, tangible reality of his peaceful life, the rich, black soil that clung to his boots, the quiet, unwavering love of Anna, whose very presence was a balm to his soul, the innocent, boundless laughter of Fyodor and Maria, whose small, warm bodies were the essence of his future. This life, humble and unadorned, was for him a sacred thing, a direct blessing from God. A fulfillment of the only true duty he had ever recognized, the duty to his family, to his land, to the continuous flow of life that sustained them. His hands, calloused and strong, yearned for the familiar heft of the plow, the rhythmic swing of the scythe, the tangible comfort of work that yielded clear, visible results. To abandon this was to abandon a part of his very soul, to sever a connection as ancient and deep as the roots of the mightiest oak. On the other side, however, pulsed the formidable, abstract pull of a larger, more distant authority, the Tsar's call, cloaked in the solemn, often grandiloquent rhetoric of honor and sacrifice, of inescapable duty to Mother Russia. To the sprawling, unfeeling entity of the empire itself, this was a force that defied logical understanding, a demand that seemed to contradict every fiber of his being, yet it carried the immense weight of divine sanction, of ancestral obedience. Father Sergei's sermons, delivered with a strained solemnity that betrayed his own human fears, echoed in Dmitri's mind, speaking of God's blessing upon the Tsar's armies, of the holy cause, of the path to eternal salvation through military martyrdom. How could these two duties, one so deeply felt and personal, the other so grand and impersonal, reconcile within the confines of a single human heart, a peasant's heart? It was in these days of pervasive disquiet that Dmitri found himself increasingly drawn to his father. Ivan Petrovich, the old man, though taciturn and reserved by nature, carried within him the living memory of that distant, fearsome world, the indelible marks of a past conflict that had once claimed him. Just as this new war now threatened to claim others, Ivan Petrovich rarely offered unsolicited advice, preferring to communicate through the stoic dignity of his presence, the quiet strength of his actions, and the occasional, deeply resonant pronouncement that seemed to distill centuries of peasant wisdom. But now, in the face of this looming darkness, his very being became a silent, living commentary on the nature of duty and sacrifice, a guiding star, albeit a somber one, in Dmitri's moral tempest. One crisp, clear afternoon, as Dmitri was meticulously sharpening the blades of their plows in the yard, the rhythmic rasp of metal against stone a familiar, almost meditative sound, Ivan Petrovich sat on the worn wooden bench beside the izba, methodically patching a fishing net, his gnarled fingers working with a slow, deliberate precision. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the scent of drying hay and the distant lowing of cattle, the kind of stillness that often precedes a coming storm, mirroring the unseen tension that permeated the village. The soil is weary, Dima, Ivan Petrovich rumbled, his voice low, almost a murmur, his gaze fixed on the intricate knots of the net. It needs rain, but man must also be weary of idleness. The Tsar's work, like the land's, demands effort and sacrifice. Dmitri paused his work, the whetstone still in his hand, its cool weight a physical anchor. He looked at his father, at the deep lines etched around his eyes, lines that seemed to hold the weight of countless unseen burdens, at the broad, powerful shoulders that had carried so much. "Father," Dmitri began, his voice surprisingly steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. You spoke of your time in the Tsar's service. What was it like? Was it glorious, as the priests say?" Ivan Petrovich ceased his work entirely, his hands falling still on the tangled netting. He stared out across the fields, his eyes distant, as if peering into a forgotten, desolate landscape, illuminated by the ghostly glow of long-dead campfires. "Glorious?" he repeated, a faint, almost imperceptible scoff, devoid of bitterness but rich with weary experience. In his voice, war is never glorious, Dima. It is dust and thirst, and the cries of men, and the stench of gunpowder and blood. It is days that stretch into weeks of endless marching under a merciless sun and nights spent shivering under a sky that mocks your suffering with its vast indifference. It is mud, and hunger, and the relentless gnawing of fear that sits in your gut like a cold stone. It is the unceasing vigilance against unseen enemies, and the sudden, brutal shock of death. He paused, his gaze slowly turning to Dmitri, his eyes holding a profound, ancient sorrow, yet also an unyielding firmness. But there is honor in it, too, an honor not of parades and gleaming medals, but of duty performed, of standing by your comrades, of enduring what must be endured, day after endless day, of protecting what is truly yours, even when you know not what that truly is, or who your true enemy might be. Dmitri listened, absorbing his father's words, which carried more weight than any sermon, more truth than any official proclamation. "But, to leave one's home? One's family? The land that sustains us?" he asked, his voice betraying the profound torment within him, a desperate plea for understanding. "Is that not a betrayal of another duty? A sacred trust?" His hand instinctively reached for the rich, dark earth beneath his feet, clutching a handful of it, as if seeking solace and certainty in its tangible, enduring reality. Ivan Petrovich picked up his net again, his fingers resuming their slow, deliberate work, the rhythm of his hands a counterpoint to the turmoil in Dmitri's soul. The Tsar is the father of all Russia. Dima, his hand, though heavy, is God's hand on earth. To defy his call is to defy God himself. Our duty to the Tsar is as ancient as the soil we till. It is woven into the very fabric of our lives, as inescapable as the turning of the seasons, as the cycle of birth and death. We are peasants, Dima. We are given this land to work, this faith to hold, and we are born to serve. First God, then the Tsar, then our family. He said these words not as a harsh command, but as a statement of immutable fact, a truth as unyielding as the granite boulders found occasionally in their fields. It was the peasant's fatalism, the quiet acceptance of an inescapable order, a dignity born of humility before vast, indifferent forces. This conversation, and others like it, played out in Dmitri's mind with relentless persistence. A constant, echoing refrain. He watched his father, this man of stoic strength, and saw the deep, unseen scars that loyalty and duty had left. He knew Ivan Petrovich had returned from his military service a changed man. Quieter, more solemn, yet also possessing an unshakable inner core. A resilience that seemed to defy all adversity. A profound stillness that stemmed from having faced the ultimate chaos. Was this the honor his father spoke of? Was it a necessary hardening of the soul? A profound tempering in the fires of conflict that ultimately led to greater spiritual fortitude? The pull of family, though, was a powerful, visceral force that tugged at his very being. He would sit with Anna in the evenings, the glow of the hearth fire painting their faces in warm hues. Watching Fyodor, sturdy and curious, practicing his letters on a piece of slate, his brow furrowed in concentration. Maria, with her bright, playful spirit, would cling to his leg, her laughter like tiny bells, demanding his attention, her innocence of pure, dazzling light. These moments, simple and profound, were the very essence of his existence, the tangible manifestation of all that was sacred to him. To leave them, to potentially never see them again, to imagine their lives unfolding without his presence, was a pain that tore at his heart with a sharp, agonizing ache. He saw Anna's worry, the subtle lines of anxiety that had begun to etch themselves around her gentle eyes. And a fierce, protective instinct rose within him, a desire to shield her from all harm, from all sorrow, from the cruelties of the distant world. How could he reconcile the sacred, palpable duty to his family with the abstract, distant demands of the Tsar? Which was the greater sin? To abandon one's blood or one's sovereign? Yet, his father's words also held a powerful, undeniable sway. Ivan Petrovich spoke not merely of blind obedience, but of honor, of a legacy, of a destiny that transcended individual desire. He had served, he had returned. He bore his scars, physical and spiritual, with quiet dignity, a living monument to duty performed. To shirk the Tsar's call, to flee, to hide, to resist, such thoughts were foreign to Dmitri's nature, tainted with a profound sense of shame, of cowardice, of a spiritual failing. The values instilled in him since childhood, honesty, diligence, obedience, respect for authority, and above all, an unshakable faith, formed a powerful, unyielding framework within his soul. To defy the Tsar was, in a way, to defy God, to break with the very order of the universe. It was a profound contradiction that tore at the very fabric of his being, leaving him in a state of profound moral anguish. The days leading up to the conscription drawing were filled with a palpable tension that hung over Krasnoe like a shroud woven from collective dread. The usual sounds of village life, the laughter of children, though now subdued, the banter of men in the fields, the communal gossip of women by the well, were now muted. Imbued with a pervasive sense of dread, the villagers moved with a new, grim determination, their faces etched with anxiety, their conversations circling relentlessly around the impending doom, the lottery that would decide their fates. Dmitri spent his days in a kind of waking trance, his hands performing the familiar tasks of harvesting rye, binding the sheaves, his body moving mechanically, while his mind remained consumed by the relentless internal debate. As he swung the scythe, the rhythmic swish of the blade, usually a source of meditative calm, now seemed to echo the relentless ticking of time, counting down to the fateful day. He would pause, sweat stinging his eyes, and gaze at the endless golden fields, once a pure symbol of his peace, now a stark reminder of what he stood to lose, of the profound rupture that threatened his very existence. His connection to the timeless order of the land. He saw the vastness of Russia reflected in the distant horizon, and felt himself, a single, insignificant peasant, caught in the immense, indifferent currents of its history, a leaf caught in an unstoppable gale. He sought solace in the church, a refuge of quiet contemplation, kneeling before the faded icon of the Mother of God, her gaze eternally compassionate, infinitely understanding. He poured out his troubled heart, not in articulate prayers, but in a torrent of unspoken anxieties, of desperate, inchoate pleas for guidance. He questioned God's will, not with rebellion or intellectual arrogance, but with a profound, almost childlike bewilderment. How could the preservation of an empire necessitate such profound suffering for its simplest, most devout sons? What was the ultimate purpose of such a seemingly senseless sacrifice? He found no immediate answers, only the quiet, steadfast presence of the icons, enduring witnesses to centuries of human suffering and unwavering faith, their silence a profound mystery. One evening, as the lamps glowed softly in their izba, casting long, dancing shadows, Anna, with the intuitive sensitivity of a devoted wife, sat beside him, her hand, soft yet calloused from her own tireless labor, rested gently on his arm, a tangible connection to his reality. Dima, she murmured, her voice a tender whisper that cut through the turmoil of his thoughts. My heart aches for you. For us. For what might have been. For what still might be. But whatever God wills, we will bear it, together. My faith tells me that He does not abandon His children, even in the darkest valleys, even when the path is shrouded in despair. Dmitri looked at her quiet strength, her unshakable belief, her profound capacity for endurance. Her faith, so pure and unwavering, was a beacon in his own spiritual tempest, a reminder of the enduring strength of their bond, of the sacredness of the family they had built. A sanctuary against the world's harshness. Your faith is stronger than mine, Anna, he admitted, his voice rough with raw emotion, a rare confession of vulnerability. I question, I doubt, I see only the pain of leaving you, of leaving our children, of leaving this land that has always been my very lifeblood. My essence. Anna leaned her head gently against his shoulder, her presence a profound comfort. To question is not to lose faith, Dima, it is to seek a deeper understanding. God is vast, His ways are mysterious, beyond our comprehension. Perhaps through suffering, through sacrifice, a greater good is wrought that we, in our smallness, cannot yet comprehend. Look at the land, Dima, it demands sacrifice in the autumn, the cutting down of the grain, the turning over of the soil, the seeming death, only to yield new, vibrant life in the spring. Perhaps it is so with men, with nations, with the very soul of Russia. Her simple analogy, drawn from the very earth he understood, resonated with a profound truth within him. It was a peasant's theology, born not of books or grand philosophical treatises, but of the cyclical reality of nature, of sowing and reaping, of death and renewal, sacrifice and renewal. This thought, so deeply rooted in the agricultural life he knew intimately, offered a sliver of comfort, a possible reconciliation between his personal duty and the Tsar's seemingly incomprehensible call. Perhaps his service, his potential suffering, could be a form of sowing, a necessary sacrifice for a future harvest of peace and well-being for his family. For Russia, for generations yet unborn, the idea, though painful, brought a strange, almost liberating sense of fatalism, a surrender to a higher, more complex order. If it was God's plan, then he would walk that path, not without fear, but with a steadfastness born of a newfound, albeit sorrowful, faith. He spoke more with Ivan Petrovich in the following days, seeking to draw on the old man's vast reservoir of experience. Ivan Petrovich recounted fragmented memories of his own service, the long, arduous marches across dusty plains, the bitter, bone-chilling cold of winter campaigns where men froze in their sleep, the eerie silence of waiting for battle, the sudden, terrifying roar of cannons, the stark, brutal reality of battle where men fell like stalks of wheat before the scythe. He spoke not of glory, for there was none, but of endurance, of the simple soldier's duty to obey, to stand his ground, to pray when all else failed. Many died, yes, Ivan Petrovich said one evening, his gaze distant, fixed on some unseen point in the past, and many more returned broken, their spirits withered, their eyes haunted, but some returned with a different strength, a deeper understanding of life's preciousness, of the brotherhood of man. Even in the midst of slaughter, they learned to rely on God, for there was nothing else, truly, for it was only God who could see their souls in that chaos. His words, imbued with a quiet stoicism, suggested that war, despite its unutterable horrors, despite its capacity for destruction, could also be a catalyst for profound spiritual growth, a brutal testing of the soul that ultimately led to greater steadfastness, to an unshakable core of being. This prospect, the idea that his faith could be strengthened, his soul refined through suffering, began to take root in Dmitri's mind. He had always yearned for a deeper understanding of God's purpose, for a life lived in full alignment with divine will. However humble, if this distant war, This brutal conscription was indeed a path to such understanding, however harsh and agonizing. Then perhaps it was a path he was destined to walk, a trial ordained by Providence. The very thought, though chilling, brought a cold certainty, a grim resolve that settled deep within him, a silent, internal hardening. The days dwindled, each one drawing inexorably closer to the dreaded date of the drawing of lots. The air in Krasnoe grew heavy with unspoken prayers, with the palpable tension of a community holding its breath. The children, usually so boisterous and carefree, played in quieter corners, sensing the adult anxieties, their innocent faces mirroring the somber moods around them. Anna, ever vigilant, would sometimes find Dmitri gazing out at the fields, a deep, contemplative sadness in his eyes, a profound weariness in his posture. She would approach him, her hand finding his, her presence a silent, unwavering comfort, a testament to their unbreakable bond. "Dima," she would murmur, her voice soft, "you are strong, you are loved, whatever comes, we will face it, together. God will not abandon us, for His mercy is infinite." Her faith, pure and unwavering, was a beacon in his own spiritual turmoil, a reminder of the enduring strength of their bond, of the sacredness of the family they had built, a sanctuary against the world's harshness. Dmitri wrestled with the abstract concept of duty. Was it the duty to preserve his individual life, his family's wholeness, the continuity of their lineage on this beloved land? Or was it the higher, more abstract duty to the Tsar, to the nation, to the collective destiny of Holy Russia? His simple faith, once a clear, unblemished stream flowing peacefully, now felt muddied by these conflicting currents, these turbulent waters of moral uncertainty. He sought answers in fervent prayer, kneeling before the icon in their izba, his pleas more desperate than ever before. He asked for guidance, for clarity, for the strength to understand God's will, even if it meant a path of suffering and separation, a path of profound, personal agony. He recounted the parables Father Sergei had told of Christ's suffering, of Abraham's ultimate sacrifice, of faith being tested in the crucible of impossible choice. But he struggled to apply them to the harsh, earthly reality of war and conscription, to his own specific dilemma. The sun beat down, relentlessly, upon the parched fields, and the air shimmered with heat. The season itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the momentous departure. The village gathered one sweltering morning, not on the green for a drawing, but for a final, solemn farewell. The 4 conscripts, Frol, Grigory, Ilya, and Pyotr, stood ready, their faces pale, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and grim resignation. Their families clung to them, their farewells a symphony of weeping and hushed blessings. Dmitri stood with Anna and Ivan Petrovich. Watching, he felt a profound sense of shared humanity, a deep empathy for their neighbor's pain, for the raw, open wound that was being inflicted upon the communal body of Krasnoe. He saw Ilya, the young widower, clutching his infant son, his face a mask of silent despair, a burden that seemed too heavy for any man to bear. Dmitri's heart ached for him, knowing the profound, solitary grief that lay ahead. As the chosen men, accompanied by the stern district commissioner and his armed Cossack escorts, began their slow, agonizing walk down the dusty road, their figures growing smaller against the vastness of the steppe, swallowed by the horizon, a profound sadness settled over Krasnoe. The sun still shone, the fields still stood heavy with ripening grain, but the light seemed colder, the air heavier with a collective sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. Dmitri watched until they disappeared, his gaze fixed on the empty road. He turned to Anna, whose face was streaked with tears, but whose eyes now held a renewed, quiet determination. He looked at his father, Ivan Petrovich, whose face was still a mask of stoicism, but whose hand, as it rested on Dmitri's shoulder, trembled almost imperceptibly. The immediate threat to Dmitri's family had been lifted, but the tranquility of the village was irrevocably altered. The predictable patterns of life, while outwardly resuming, now carried a new, unsettling undercurrent. The war was no longer a distant abstraction, it was a living, breathing entity that now had a subtle, yet undeniable, presence in the quiet heart of Krasnoe. Dmitri knew that the steadfastness of his heart, forged in this internal struggle, and the hearts of his people, would be tested again, perhaps soon, in ways they could not yet fathom. The seeds of anxiety had been sown. And in the fertile soil of Krasnoe, they would surely grow, demanding an enduring spirit and an unwavering faith. His innocent heart, once so sheltered, was now prepared to face the shadow of empire. Fortified by the legacy of his father and the profound, enduring power of his faith, now deeper and more complex for having wrestled with doubt. Part 1 of the story ends here. Thank you and goodbye. See you again in the next part.